Hey guys, what's up? Shadowlands back for another video. Today I wanted to go over a topic that I did go over once about 2 to 3 years ago, and it was wildly successful, but I'd like to go over it again because the topic of the video has actually changed more or less in the actual content that I wanted to toss in. Today I wanted to talk about Nexon's economic policy changes towards combat arms as a company. So we're looking at the pay-to-win side, we're looking at the balancing side, we're looking at everything that's been integrated into the game, and we're going to be going back as far as the first year it was released. So starting at the very beginning, and honestly this covers basically everything up until the very end of 2012. So we're talking about from the day the game came out, from the day beta was out, up until the end of 2012, this stuff was completely relevant, and then the game changed drastically with the 2012 winter sale, and we'll get to that in a minute, but let's start off at the beginning. So when Combat Arms first came out, it was the most popular first-person shooter free-to-play game on the internet. That was hands down true. They had 6 million to 7 million just really active accounts and players. There were a lot of people playing the game. It was an active, fun game. However, it was heavily pay to win. Now, at the time, it was very hard to fault the company for this because even though it was unethical, it was very profitable because they were the only game to really play. There were no other online games that were really good shooters like this that could compete with it. The only ones that it was competing with were the pay-to-win ones, or sorry, paid games like Counter-Strike Source, for example, is a really great one, and later on Global Offensive. However, that hit the market later, and I actually believe that game is part of what prompted Nexon to change some of their economic policies. I'll get that onto in a minute. But early on, you're looking at, okay, we're talking like the Arctic Wolf era, where everyone had an Arctic Wolf. Everyone wanted to buy an Arctic Wolf, use an Arctic Wolf, and that was one of the go-to weapons. You also had a few other weapons like the M416 CQB, and just some really like staple weapons like that people went to, they stuck to, they didn't change from, because those were the weapons to use. However, they overcharged for these things. Those snipers were $30 a piece, the assault rifles were $25, shotguns were $20, and it's like there were set prices for every kind of weapon, no matter how good or bad the weapon was. They said, this is how much shotguns are, this is how much SMGs are, this is how much assault rifles, snipers, machine guns, this is how much everything costs, and we're not going to change that. And those prices were ridiculously high. Any other company would have said, okay, yeah, you can buy an SMG from us for like maybe $4 to $5 max. And that's what you see nowadays, where those guns are nowhere near as expensive. In fact, obviously, Nexon has gone and adopted some of that stuff. However, at the time, that was their economic policy. And it was very hard to fault them for that because, like I said, even though it was horribly unethical and it was just stealing money from people, that's quite frankly what it was. It was being a robber baron because they were the only ones that could actually afford to do that. No other game could compete with them and get them to change their policy. So that was the thing that was really, really dangerous around that time, making money with this game. Now, however, even though they were able to get away with it and make an absolute fuck ton of money during that period of time, they were not able to keep that up, and they changed out of that policy way too slowly. And when they did it way too drastically, way too suddenly. Now, by the time the end of 2012 was coming out, we started seeing a bunch of other free-to-play shooters popping up that were of very high quality. We saw Alliance of Valiant Arms, we saw Soldier Front 2, we saw a lot of games like those starting to pop up, and they were starting to compete. Even though they weren't as good and they did eventually die off, every one of these games that came up to compete with Combat Arms is another one that they had to focus their economic policy around. However, the way they responded was to say, okay, at the end of 2012, we're going to release a crap ton of NX rares for permanent. Now, up until that point, there were only a couple of ways you could get NX rares, and getting one for permanent was damn near impossible. You either had to get a renewal kit. At the time, there were no super renewal kits, so you could not have those high chances of getting permanent renewals anyway. And also, you could get them out of cases straight. And getting those for permanent, as we all know, is still damn near impossible. That hasn't changed, actually. Thank God. But anyway, the point was, it was very hard to get these weapons for permanent. So even if you got a hold of one of these amazing weapons, chances are you'd only have it for 7 to 30 days. Or if you really went and spent all the money that you could renew it for a good long amount of time, but that still wasn't permanent. And it's something about having a gun be permanent in your inventory that really has that psychological effect of it belongs to you, as opposed to you're still just renting it, which is why a lot of people wanted to go for that. So when Nexon released all of these permanent weapons for 40 to 50 bucks a piece, I shit you not, some of those weapons were $55, and I know people that went out and bought them. My brother went out and bought a few, and I thought he was crazy for it, but my point was, you could go and buy these weapons now. And so this very quickly created a power vacuum where you have two different kinds of players. It used to be that you had your casuals, you had people that spent a little bit of money and could eventually get some things, and the people who were super, super rich would go and buy specs and rent those every month. And that's what the most rich people would go and pay for. But that was really it. And specs really were banned in every room anyway, so it wasn't ever that big of an issue. However, the second they introduced all these weapons that year for Christmas, 2012, everyone who can afford these weapons goes and buys them, and it very quickly divides the community into people that can afford this shit and people that can't afford this shit. And obviously that created a ridiculous power vacuum. Now, that coupled with a certain policy as far as running the game that Nexon held for that year and a couple years previous, that was a very, very bad thing. What they had done, if you guys are not aware, is for those like year and a half to 2 years prior to that sale, they had released the fewest number of updates, patches, new maps, new guns, even hacking patches that had ever come out in the history of the game. They had very few updates. They didn't even post on their website very often. It was pathetic how little they put out, despite how much money they were making. And because of that, hacks like Gordon Sys and Valkyrie Injector, a lot of very famous ones that were popular during the time, even self-made hacks that honestly, they weren't that hard to make for the game before Black Cypher came in. But the main point was, all these hacks were getting made and Nexon was doing nothing to fix it. If you called someone a hacker, you were probably right. And honestly, you'd walk into a game and it was almost impossible to find a game that you didn't run that did not have hackers in it. It was damn near impossible. And this coupled with the fact that at the end of the year they release a big patch to patch all the hacks and then also these guns, people did not step out of that mentality eventually. What they did was they focused entirely on the fact that, oh great, we have all these grand new weapons, and it was fun for like a week, and then people realized how overpowered everything was and that Nexon was not going to balance jack shit. On top of the fact that for that period of time, people were not really focusing on the fact that, oh, we have this new patch, hackers aren't a thing anymore. People turned around and started saying, oh, you're still a hacker. People still started calling people hackers, and that made things even worse because that mentality pursued on to even modern day. We still have that, and honestly, I believe that is the stem of all problems in Combat Arms was those couple of years. If those couple of years had happened differently, if we'd been seeing consistent patches, changes to the economic policy that other games were doing, because that was also the period of times that other games were coming up, we would have seen a much different game now. We would not be seeing anything even remotely like we have now. And quite frankly, I think it's disgusting on Nexon's part. I don't think it's a very, very good economic policy to do what they did there. To make things even worse, after these guns were sold, they then said, okay, we're not going to nerf jack shit. In fact, we're going to make it even worse. We're going to introduce this customization option where you can go and increase the damage on your M417 CQB camo. And you know what? You're going to be able to absolutely melt people at long range with zero recoil and do crap loads of damage. And so that made things even worse, honestly, in my opinion. That being said, they then proceeded to make things a little bit better over time. However, at this point, the game was already a sinking ship. I believe the game was going downhill as early as 2014, and it was going downhill fast. They were not introducing enough new content. They were not introducing enough game-changing things that should have been in the game from day one. All these weapon skins that they've started doing in the past year or so are completely irrelevant. Honestly, they don't do anything to change the guns and performance, but they know they can do it because they can get away with it. Right now, what they're doing with Combat Arms is they are milking this cow until it dies. They don't care about preserving the game. They don't care about doing jack shit. That being said, it's very, very sad because this game is a lot of fun. The mechanics are great. It's still relevant this many years later, but there are so many things that the company just simply did not put their time and money towards, despite the fact that this was their most money-making game, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. If you're going to have a game that makes you this much money, the most you can do is look after it. Actually, that's the least you can do. Look after it, make sure it thrives. The most you can do is actually continue to put the majority of your resources towards it. However, we know that they run games like MapleStory, Atlantica Online, and other games like that, so they can't always just put every bit of their force towards Combat Arms. However, as their primary money-making cow these days, it would seem that they would try to keep that cow alive as long as possible. And right now, it seems like the way they're doing that is through their new economic policy. Now, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but starting back about, a year or two ago is when they started saying, okay, we're now going to start making you pay for weapons based on how well they perform in our eyes. And for the majority, I'd say about 80% of those analyses are fair. You're paying like, $6 for an R870, I believe, something like that. It's very cheap. And honestly, that's a pretty fair price, at least compared to what you have for everything else. Now, overall, is it fair? Probably not. If you had really fair weapon pricing, then okay, the most expensive things would be maybe $10 at most. And I'm saying that's for like, you could buy an Andromalius for $15. And now I know that sounds absurd in mind right now, but keep in mind you'd be scaling everything back to that point where you could say, an R870, 30 cents. It'd be really, really cheap. Because that's what a lot of games do right now. They say, okay, you want to buy something? It's going to be for permanent. They don't even have any other duration. You buy it. It is yours. You have paid for it. You are not renting it. You can use in-game money to rent, but you can use real money to buy, purchase, and call it your own forever. So they're saying that, but also what's going on is that you have people who say, let's go ahead and release these weapons in this case, guarantee that you're going to get them, and then they're going to be incredibly overpowered. So people do stuff like that. On top of the fact that they still do have the rental process, which means that somehow they are making money off of just rentals, which means people will buy this stuff and then come back and rebuy it and rebuy it and rebuy it for whatever reason. They won't just buy it permanently. So you have that economic policy as well. All of these things combined just make for a really, really poor economic policy as a whole. So the entire game economically is just a giant sinking ship. It is a Titanic. In fact, it is sinking faster than the Titanic. This thing is dying really fast in terms of its economic policy. If they had simply not made those reforms back at 2012, if they had reformed the game differently, I believe that if at 2012 they had gone through and said for our Christmas present, instead of giving us all these MX rares, if they had incorporated this policy of having worse weapons be like less costly and even bringing down the prices of the really, really good weapons, then that may have saved the game. Because if they had adopted that policy, I think, 3 years prior to when they did at the beginning of 2015, or 2 years, 3 years prior than what they did, they may have been able to save the game, because it would definitely be a Christmas present to say that everything is now on sale and everything is now much cheaper. That would have been an excellent Christmas present and definitely would have been a great way to get people to buy stuff during that Christmas sale and for them to make money during that season. But no, they decided we're going to go ahead and milk as much money as we can, ruin the game forever, and they honestly, there is no conversation they could have had at Nexon HQ that could convince me to say, oh, this was a good idea. So quite frankly, I think they have absolute jackasses for economic policy designers and anyone that works in their business department. I think they are jackasses. They have no idea how to run a game, or if what they're trying to do is simply make as much money off the game and kill it as fast as possible, then they could do that. What I think has really happened is that they said, okay, starting in 2012, this game is going to go downhill because our competitors are saying, oh, we can't compete with them anymore. We're saying we can't compete with our competitors anymore on free-to-play games, so we're going to let this ship die. What I think happened was that the company that is the people that are so ravenously following this company and following this game are saying, okay, well, we don't want to let the game die. And so the people that play the game stuck around longer than the people who anticipated it would stick around wanted them to. So people said, okay, the business people at Nexon said, okay, we're going to release this sale and we're going to try to make one last big bit of money at the end of 2012. We think the game will die in less than 2 years. Well, guess what? 2016, the game is still around. The people who made those plans at that time did not expect Combat Arms to still be running at this time. They really didn't expect it to. They thought it would have been dead 2 years ago. But guess what? That did not happen. People stuck around, people played the game, people kept feeding them money because they were able to extort it. And because of that, they then said, okay, now we're finally going to implement this policy where we say, okay, crappier weapons are worth less and better weapons are worth more. They finally implemented that as a final stretch to get people to start paying for stuff. However, it did not work. People are still playing the game. And now they're doing something called releasing skins, which is really kind of stupid, and then charging full price for them because they have literally no other value other than the fact that they were, quote, one-time event things. However, then they go resell them again. So they're just going to keep coming up with these bullshit economic policies until the game actually dies. I think they expected the game to die over 2 years ago. It didn't, so now they're just coming up with random things that they can in order to make a little more money before the game dies. My point is, don't feed the game more money. Just play on what you have, and you'll be a better, happier person because of it. Don't focus so much on it. Just enjoy the game for what's left. Because honestly, that's what I'm doing. Combat Arms is going to die eventually, as sadly as it's going to be. It's like waiting for someone with cancer to die. It's really sad. It really, really is, because you love the game. The game is brilliant. It's fun, but you know it's going to die, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. And as much as the company may try to milk out money from it, it is pointless to throw more money at it because the result will not change. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Shadowlance out.